Hey everyone, we have a very big week ahead here this week with major tech earnings and also economic data later on this week, Thursday, Friday the jobs report, and then of course the week after we have the election. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. I want to share with you what the charts look like of some of the major tech stocks that are reporting this week. But first, let's quickly start off with how the week last week ended. And this is not meant to be something to get very bearish about as much as it's just trying to show that the equity market here is a little bit less willing, at least as far as the S&P 500 goes, which of course is 38% focused on 10 stocks, which is crazy historically. But we are seeing continued signs of essentially the market not yet willing to break back higher. So if you look at this on a weekly closing basis, which is really kind of where it gets more interesting, you can see that last week the S&P 500 on a weekly closing basis closed down about 1%. That's nothing, right? It's really just consolidation, but it's noteworthy. The NASDAQ 100 was up 0.17%. Why not? You know, if one stock goes up, the whole thing goes up. NVIDIA. But the Russell 2000 was actually down 3%. And it's still, as I have been saying now for weeks and weeks and weeks, the Russell 2000, it's not a breakout until it actually breaks out, right? And it just hasn't broken out. So we need to respect that, and I'd much more prefer to actually trade the breakout once it's actually occurred, as opposed to anticipating and getting a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Now, let's look at a couple of these major stocks out there that are reporting earnings this week. A lot of these guys are starting to report earnings between Tuesday and Thursday is kind of when they're reporting, and in no sequence of any importance. There are names: Apple, Amazon. We've got Google and Microsoft. I know is up as well, and Meta as well. So really a lot of stocks. So let's just walk through a couple of them, and I'm trying to make people kind of see how interesting a spot many, if not most, of these stocks are trading at. And again, keep in mind, we've got an election and we've already had a big move, and some of the 4Ps, particularly something like NVIDIA, are really starting to get very frothy. That's not a bad stock. It just means that it's historically hasn't gone a lot higher until earnings have started catching up again. But this, for example, is Amazon. Let's just run through a couple of them. Amazon kind of wedging here, and this is just one way of drawing lines, and this is oversimplistic. You know, I always talk about how this is kind of easy, but I would watch for a potential breakout in either direction. If it sticks a landing, particularly on a daily closing basis, that might be the direction I would trade a stock in. A break to the upside, maybe it's a quick chase. To the downside, maybe that will be reflected in other parts of the market as well. Microsoft, let's just look at a couple of them here. Microsoft, really not a heck of a lot different. Again, we can draw lines in many different ways. What sort of comes to mind for me is something like this. And if we were to sort of juxtapose that with what I drew on the Amazon chart, it looks very similar. So we have these wedges, which is, the more narrow it gets, the more ultimately it breaks out in one direction or another. So that's kind of how I think about it. Google is a little bit different, but Google too is essentially in a consolidation phase. And so, a lot of people that armchair technical analysts like to call this an inverse head and shoulders pattern, and that's bullish because those things are always bullish, right? But here too, you can see essentially a consolidation phase. And so we could argue that whatever direction this resolves to might be the next trade. I'll show you all more, and that is Meta, META, of course, formerly known as Facebook. The stock here too, as much as people have talked about this going all sorts of places, it hasn't done a single thing since basically the second half of September. That's only a few weeks, right? That's not very long ago, but still it is consolidating. So here, if I were to get a bit more creative and take up my doodle tool, you would kind of draw something like this, and that's kind of the trading range that the stock has been in for the past month, a little more than a month, so roughly about a 6 to 7% trading range. And I would argue in whatever direction this goes, I would respect it. One thing that comes to mind for the bears, right? And again, we're totally open-minded what happens here next as far as the trade is concerned. But if I were a bear and I'm completely neutral, I have no view on Meta, to be honest with you, I would be concerned if we see a down gap. Why? Because that could then result in this having been an island reversal, meaning we had an up gap on the 19th of September. That's this right there where the big arrow is pointing at. And if we were to get a down gap here, like meaning where the stock just opens up lower day after earnings, let's say, that could then mark this area up here as a consolidation phase, an island, a sort of an isolated island of price action, and that would be a pretty good, at least near-ish term topping pattern. One could sort of sell call spreads against it, or even do a directional trade to the downside if one wants to. But that would be that. And the upside, quite frankly, if we break out, we break out, and then the trend just continues. I think that's kind of where we're at. So anyway, all of this has to do with momentum. And this week, we're going to have a very, very special 3-day open boot camp. It's going to be like 40 minutes each day, not even maybe half an hour. We're going to start on Tuesday, and we're going to talk about stocks and momentum. And I'll show you many, many, many examples of stocks with momentum, actionable ones. On Wednesday, we're going to come right back and do the same exact thing for ETFs. And then on Thursday, we're going to bring it all together and talk about how to use options on stocks and ETFs using momentum. We're going to use our momentum indicator, which you guys are all welcome to have access to. And that is the plan for this week. So if you haven't done so yet, please sign up down below. Big week this week. A lot of things are coming together here in early November. Remember, we're going to have, again, earnings out this week, jobs report on Friday, among some other data on Thursday, election, of course, the week after, and then we have the Fed. It's just a lot of stuff coming together geopolitically as well. Not exactly been a great weekend this past weekend. So a lot of stuff is coming together in November, and I think it's very important that we're aware of that this market going either direction. But what will definitely happen, doesn't matter what it is, what happens, there will be momentum, either to the upside or the downside, but we need a proper way to capture that. And I'll show you how we are going to do that. We'll see you there.